Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby, and I am here with Robert King from Elsbeth. And this character, Carrie Preston, made into a real fan favorite on The Good Wife and The Good Fight. But when did you kind of know or get the idea that, okay, Elsbeth needed to be the central figure in her own story?
Uh, I would say when we brought her back after the third season on Good Wife, she was such a striking presence. And even then, there was this Columbo-like aspect to her, of her looking at the world slightly differently and not from a place of someone who's gone to the best college or gone to the best anything. She always seemed to be someone who was really underappreciated by people around her and usually the villains. So that just seemed good. And it seemed like a good idea after that. I don't think we really got serious until the pandemic when we were sitting around, Michelle and myself, my co-creator, showrunner, watching things and realized that, with all the options of streaming that we could have watched, we ended up going back to Columbo episodes because they were fun and made for good TV.
Yeah, something very comforting about it. And I think that's something that she has to her in this character because she has a lot of charm. There's a kind of naivete to her a little bit, but now she's dropped into these serious, very serious criminal investigations. What was kind of the most surprising result of mixing those two elements together?
Michelle and I, and also myself as a director, find the best way to dive into weird things is to just dive into them. And so that people are so used to like, okay, don't mix these foods, don't mix these colors or drama and comedy. It always seems like best to treat the 10-minute opening crime as the straight man to the comedian who comes later. So it was that, and then probably when we were developing it, the directorial style was to do a cop show that Elsbeth or Carrie Preston kept sneaking into, like that she would come from the back row. There'd be a line of cops, and she would come from the back row, or she would lean into the side of the frame, so that you still had this like CBS procedural, but here's somebody who came in and kept interrupting it with her oddball sensibility.
That can be sort of tricky sometimes when you take a character who is the oddball and is built to be the supporting player, and then they have to command their own story. How did you kind of ensure that? Was there anything different that you had to do with Elsbeth that way?
Well, one thing by casting Wendell and Wendell's interest in it, having a real serious, heft to someone who gives strength to the fact that these are actual crimes. Because one of the things about Elsbeth is she doesn't really have a lot of compassion for people. She's someone who thinks of it kind she kind of thinks of it as a puzzle to be solved. So you don't have that usual thing to lean on with CBS procedurals where, oh, it's the heroes caring about the victim or caring about the loved one. It was like, well, that's not really Elsbeth. She's not really that. So I forgot your question, but I think that was a pretty good answer to some question. You can ask
Yes.
another question and you can fit that answer in.
Well, insert. Well, you mentioned Wendell Pierce. He's one of, many stage talents, Broadway talents that you utilize on this to great effect, which your other two shows in this world were stomping grounds for a lot of Broadway performers, and now we still have like Jane Krakowski, Linda Lavin, Laura Benanti. What is the kind of the best part for you of bringing in that stage
Oh my
talent from New
God.
York?
They have so much respect for the writing. I don't even think I have as much respect for the writing as they do. I mean, they're really trying to understand the concept behind what you wrote. And they're willing to try anything because when I direct, I just like taking the words as a guide and now let's play with that. What is it? So let's ad lib something here, and shoot it, just not just do it as rehearsal, but I need to fill 5 minutes here. Go ahead or at the end of a scene. So there's that. There's also a real sense of strong presence to them. Sometimes they resist the explanatory dialogue aspect of a procedural, which is fun because they're more willing to lean into comedy and not treat it. Sometimes you don't want it treated as, this is the worst thing that can happen. This is sort of fun. I don't know. We've only had great experiences with theater actors. Not to, we use anybody who wants to play, but theater actors really do want to play and I think have a lot of fun.
Well, I think too, you mentioned before about the openings of a procedural, and I think that's uh such a key element is having this well-crafted opening scene that lures you in. This one in the pilot, Stephen Moyer is the acting teacher, and it's an incredible montage of him staging this suicide. How much tinkering and planning goes into executing a moment like that?
What oddly, the thing that got the most tinkering and planning was the stage work. Because there's a play going on, uh, uh, and he's timing it to do the crime or half the crime during the stage, and that really meant kind of what are the colors we're after. I really wanted a red. I hate saying the word palette, but I will say it. A red palette for the opening. I wanted something where there was a death on the stage but then you see this kind of very Ocean's 11 like procedural of how he's setting up a crime, and that had to be very Hitchcockian in its camera use. I mean, I can't imagine when we last used handheld camera, and we rarely use Steadicam. It's always studio-based camera work, and it's to kind of give that kind of flowing quality to it. So we wanted to sense that, oh my God, how could Elsbeth ever solve this? Because this guy solved, figured out everything. And that meant this kind of precise camera work to make it work.
And Stephen Boyer plays a great villain. I think that's also something you need in those moments. What was the key in the casting process for figuring out an adversary for
Well,
Elsbeth?
with that, what really was lucky is obviously Carrie and Stephen had worked together before on True Blood. So a real affection between the two of them and a willingness to go into the darker areas of the characters. Because Carrie's character is doing it because he's sleeping with his students. And then when one's gonna, get him canceled, he kills her. So there's a strong reality to that kind of crime. So you needed someone who was willing to go with that Stephen was. And more importantly, Stephen seems like one of these James Bond villains in a way that you needed across from Carrie. Like he's thought of everything. And so then he's really surprised by someone who's as silly and as fritzy as Carrie is. But the most important thing was their affection for each other, I think, because they could really play mano a mano better than anyone.
Hmm. And I think something that also makes the show very specific and unique is that it leans into very New York stories. Like this is about an acting teacher. A lot of it just feels very of New York in that specificity. How did you kind of approach making the city its own character in the show?
Well, there was a lot of conversation with Fred Murphy, the DP, who we worked so long on Good Wife and Good Fight. And we have so much to react against with the show because what the argument for the show was it is a tourist view of New York. So we wanted most police procedurals go into alleys, go into the grit, the very blue, kind of faded blue look or a deep blue, like Bruckheimer kind of blues. And what we wanted was, okay, we're going to go to tourist attractions as much as we can. We're going to go to Rockefeller Center. We're going to get a view of New York that is beautiful. Because if you live here, you can find both. I mean, there's some places in Central Park that are some of the prettiest places in the world. So we always wanted it to be that. And then the murders themselves, strangely enough, had to be beautiful, had to be, there's an elegance to them. There's something, this is all happening in the richest rooms. That's not who Elsbeth is. Elsbeth is attracted to the trinket shops in Times Square. She buys for the Stephen Moyer character kind of a little Grammy or something or a little statue. She buys the shit that is what tourists would buy. So anyway, it's that difference between the New York as appreciated by someone who doesn't live there and sees everything as beautiful, and then the crime underneath it.
Well, it's a really incredible way to highlight New York and highlight this great character. So thank you for bringing Elsbeth to the forefront in her own series.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby, and I am here with Boots Riley from the amazing series I'm a Virgo. I don't think, Boots, that I can compare the style of this show to anything else on TV. It has this really unique, heightened sensibility, heightened reality to it, and I'm curious what inspired that kind of visual and tonal identity.
I think it all started when I didn't have enough money to go to the barber shop for my own haircut and was forced to use trimming clippers to cut my hair and create a hairstyle in which I ended up, I don't know what it was. It was a combination of a shag and a mohawk and something else that I'm embarrassed to look at the pictures of to this day. But I created my own style. And that's kind of like what this show is like you, 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 if you do the things that are truly you, truly what you're thinking about, truly what you care about, they might not be all the things that everybody has the categories in which people are used to talking about things. So they come out in this other way that, feels like a new genre. But it's really just creating things.
Yes, and the show, the centerpiece of the show, the lead is a giant, and I know you used a lot of practical ways to shoot that, a lot of forced perspective.
Forced
When you're
perspective. We also
Yes.
use puppetry, like actually had puppeteers, and a 13-foot tall puppet, and then half scale puppets of all the cast so that we could shoot over their shoulders to Jarrell, who's playing the giant.
Mhm.
Yeah, we pulled out every trick in the book. And of course, you still have to use VFX sometimes because you've got rigs holding things up or whatever, but it's in the parts of the screen that you're not used to, and you still get that. I want things to be visceral. I want it to feel like you see something and it's a texture that you're not used to. Because I think with CGI, we're just we're not aware of what we're missing, right? Even on when you've got $50 million for one shot or something like that. We're not aware of how light works all the way yet. And I mean, like what the details that we're missing. And yeah, I like things to be messy and rough and jagged.
When you're using all those techniques, I imagine like some often you'll have actors who aren't actually looking at one another if they're delivering a line. So is there a trick you use to keep them on the same page and keep that connection there with them?
Well, one, um, I made sure they hung out off camera a lot. And so beyond rehearsal, that they built a rapport with each other. And that was a little bit easy because it was during COVID, so they didn't have many other choices of who they could socialize with. And we shot uh, the lion's share of this in New Orleans, so they hung out together a lot. And but yeah, the anytime Jarrell was on the screen, he's here, supposed to be talking to this person, but we need to make him bigger. So they're not looking at each other. And so they really have to know each other's mannerisms and use a lot of imagination. But for us, the story of this giant was about him being isolated and searching for connection. And working through all of his own problems in order to make connection and also larger connections in the world. So that disconnect that was created by that really worked for us.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite moments, especially from the first episode, is because there's a lot of big stuff that happens, it feels, but then there's just the moment of Cootie discovering the city, when he finally goes out on a drive, and there's so much awe and wonderment. He even says, "I feel small" for the first time. What was the process of creating that kind of montage? and getting that emotion in there.
Well, it's interesting. A lot of what we show in that montage that happened, that was Jarrell feeling like, wow, I'm a big star all of a sudden, because we had this whole, rig, and he's up high on this half scale car, and we just went out there. It wasn't guerrilla style, it was permitted, but we just went out there and everybody's looking at him. And and this was his action. A lot of that is his actual reaction to before he knew the cameras were shooting, to like being in this situation, right? And
Right.
And then once then he figured out we're shooting. And I came up with that line right there, I feel small, just because of what he was looking at. And it actually, is what he would be feeling, is like that. It's a relief because he's trapped in this house where he has to bend over this all the time, that, you know, and what he's about to learn and learning right then is how big the universe is. And yeah, so a lot of the reactions of people on the street pointing to him, that was the reaction of the people on the street pointing at the 13-foot doll, like being like, what the fuck is that, um so yeah.
It's interesting that you say you came up with that line in the moment, because it must be a series with so many technical requirements and preparations to get those shots correct. So is it difficult to kind of still be in the moment when you have all of that technical aspect in your head?
I think you forget about what parts are. I mean, I'll put it like this: we had to storyboard almost every frame of the movie, right? I mean, of this show, um, just because, to save money, right? It was, what can we get away with only building this in half scale, or doing that? Can we just build this wall and that, and do this in that many shots or whatever? So much of it was planned out, but because it had taken so long, by then it's like somebody improvising on a crazy, time signature. Like they've played this time signature so much that they can then play inside of it. And you know what? We also figured out, along with that we could, it didn't have to be so exact, that we could mess around a little bit here and there, and there would be some feel, because with the forced perspective, you either have to be lit very brightly, or you have to, I mean, well, one, if you want to do it all in one pass, you have to have deep focus. So for some things, they'll just light it very brightly, but we didn't want to do that. So we could either do it in two passes or what. But as we were messing around with it, we realized, like, it doesn't, fuck it, it doesn't have to all be crystal sharp, right? It can be like, we can just have him turn this way a little bit, and this can be a little bit out of focus because that person is a foot farther away from us, supposedly, right? So we found ways to play around and improvise on the spot. And yeah. And also, we were taking big swings at a lot of things. So sometimes it was an improvisation of like, well, whoa, this thing did not work. What do we do instead? You know? So
Well, it all worked in the end. It's a
yeah,
really unique series. So thank you so much for sitting here and
thanks
discussing
a
with
lot.
me.
Thanks a lot.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby, here with Michael Dinner from Justified City Primeval. And it is so exciting to have Raylan Givens back on our screens. But I know this particular book, City Primeval, is not a Raylan Givens story in real life. So what was kind of the most exciting aspect of dropping this character into this new setting for you?
Well, it started some years ago. I got a call from Peter Leonard, who's Elmore Leonard's son. And Peter and the estate talked to me about if I had any interest in turning City Primeval into a show. And I started working on it, and I got a phone call one day from Tim Oliphant. I was in Rome, and he was shooting Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And he said, Quentin and I were talking, and have you ever heard of City Primeval? And I think he probably heard that I was about to go out with it. I said, oh, yeah. And he said, well, it might make a great year at Justified. It was never in our mind to do another year at Justified. We thought we stuck the landing some years ago. And anyway, we started talking about it. FX was very excited about the idea. And so I abandoned doing this as a period piece, from 30 years ago to taking Raylan Givens and kind of catapulting him into the story. It was fun. It was fun to go back into the writer's room with a lot of people who had worked together before. It was fun to put this character back on the screen.
There's something about having him here that maintains like almost a momentum of the Western, but it definitely has the tone of a crime drama. Was it difficult to mash those two things together? How did you work with the tone?
Well, that was always the mashup in a way. I mean, even in the original series, I mean, it was kind of a postmodern neo-noir, Western. And, Elmore Leonard started writing Westerns, and then he gravitated towards American crime fiction. City Primeval was one of his first, American crime novels. It's just a fun mashup to do. I mean, I remember when we were doing the original show, the first day of shooting, I was setting up a shot. We were on this farm, supposedly in Kentucky. And it was like a showdown on a main street in a Western. And I looked over Tim's shoulder, and there was a satellite dish on the roof. And I said, well, that's the style of the show, So Justified was certainly this kind of neo-noir Western. And, City Primeval, the original title of the book was City Primeval or High Noon in Detroit. So it certainly pays homage to the Westerns that he wrote. And yet it's also this, piece of crime fiction. It's a fun mashup to do.
Yeah, I think there's something about this one that feels like it has a bit more menace a lot. Like the first episode concludes with this very shocking car chase and double murder. What was it like going into that kind of heavy material?
Well, we weren't trying to do a retrospective on Justified. This is a show called City Primeval, and we took this character and we thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to drop him into the middle of the story? It's kind of a more grown up version of the show that we did. Certainly, there's a sense of humor in places. It's funny in places, but it's dark. And what I love about doing Elmore Leonard's material is there's an opportunity for the director, the writer, the actor. I like to say that you don't see the joke coming, you don't see the violence coming, you don't see the emotion coming, sometimes within the same breath. So to do that, and to do this story where he is a fish out of water in Detroit, Detroit's a character in the piece, or our version of Detroit. And it was fun to do. And it also pays homage, I think, to Elmore, who we loved working with.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the darkness too comes from the villain, which Justified always had amazing villains, and this one is no different with Boyd Holbrook's character. But he's a different adversary. He's totally a wild card. He's this force of nature. And what does that type of character facing him off with Raylan give you? What does that unlock?
Look, we knew we had some big shoes to fill. We had some great villains over 6 years. But this is a different villain in the sense that with the other Boyd, with Boyd Crowder, that was a character that there was an understanding between the two of them that grew up mining coal together. Boyd Holbrook's character, Mansell in this piece, is uncorked, unpredictable, and dangerous. I think dangerous to Raylan because we see a Raylan who's 10 years older. We see him as kind of this walking anachronism. We see him having lost maybe a quarter of a step. He's older in the world, and the world's changed a little bit for him, at least. And I think what makes this character dangerous is the unpredictability, as you said.
Did Boyd come in with that kind of characterization from the get-go? Because there's so many, I think, possibilities for the way you could play that role.
He brought his own thing to it, though certainly it was on the page. I mean, this is a very interesting character that was on the page. We had the great thing about Elmore is that when you adapt him, you can kind of take the ball and run with it, but you also have to know when to get out of the way. And so, certainly there are aspects of this character, the character they created, but that novel was written 40 years ago. So we had to play with it and make it our own. And then I think Boyd made it his own.
Yeah, and in addition to the two of them facing off, I would almost say it's really a trio, because you have Carolyn there, and they are so intertwined with their stories, which feels a little bit different for a Justified story. So what was it like working with that trio together?
Look, we always knew it was a three-hander, that it was those two characters and Anshadu Ellis's character. And everybody's has their own story and their own secrets, and they're working an angle. And I love the relationship between Carolyn and Raylan. I think there's a certain kind of organic, honesty to it. And three powerhouse actors. To direct the three of them was really fun. And then I think also, we had other great actors in this piece. I think in a way, Carolyn is, part of Detroit, or Detroit's part of her. And the same thing with Vondi Curtis Hall, who has a certain weight and gravitas that he brings to this. He's kind of the spine of the whole story.
Yeah. Well, you said before, you thought you sticked the landing for Justified, which you certainly did. And now we have this other amazing journey. Are there other kind of Raylan stories that you're looking at? Will you attempt to stick the landing yet again?
Look, Dave Andron, my partner in this, we used to say that we felt this was the second act of Raylan's life, that we spent the first act in the hollers of Kentucky. And we got to tell this story at a place in his life when the road in front of him is a lot shorter than the road behind. And we have a little bit of a surprise ending, in this 8-episode series that we didn't really do to set up a future story, but there is a future. I think there's a third act. And if FX and Sony decide that they want to do another chapter, I know that there's 2 actors who want to do it and a couple of showrunners who want to do it. So we'll see what happens. But if this is the second landing, I think we stuck it, and there could be a third landing. It depends on how life works out,
Yeah. How much of the aesthetic and the history of Justified did you feel like you had to either incorporate or ignore? Like, what was the relationship there?
Well, I think we did a little bit of a dance, I think that this looks a little different than the original series. Like I said, I think it's a little bit more grown up, a little edgier, even more noirish and darker, though you could say that was kind of Southern fried noir. We had to be aware of what came before, but we didn't want to be slavish. I mean, and whether that's in the look of the show, in the composition, in the lighting, in the music, we wanted this to be its own thing, but also, Raylan comes onto the screen and he brings his baggage with him. So certainly that exists within this new world.
Yeah. Well, it's if there is another dance to be done, we'll greatly look forward to it. But whatever the case may be, it's a wonderful job with City Primeval. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby, and here with me is Matthew López from Red, White, and Royal Blue. This story began as a successful novel, obviously. What was it to you about the book that really cried out to you and needed to be this movie?
It was it was the wonderfulness of the novel, and then it was really more specifically these characters, especially Alex and Henry. And then very, very specifically for me, it was Alex as a character. I had never read a book with a queer Latinx character in the lead that was so complexly yet also positively drawn. He was I knew that if I had seen him in a movie growing up, that would have really changed the way I thought about myself. And I wanted to make sure that other young Latinx audience members, kids growing up watching, had that chance.
Yeah, and I think it's a romance film, and I don't think it works without the chemistry between the two main characters. It has to be really palpable, and your leads certainly have it. How do you even begin to look for that during the casting process?
I mean, honestly, the casting process, we spent months looking for these two actors, and we saw a lot of really wonderful people for it. And you had to sort of cast to the chemistry. And we had some really wonderful choices. I was very sort of glad in the choices that we had, but individually, Nick and Taylor were both so wonderful, and but we tried all these different combinations, and we put the two of them together, and it was just instant. I mean, it was like plugging a light into a socket, plugging a lamp into a socket. It just was there, and it was there. I mean, the funny thing is it was there instantaneously from the hellos before they even started doing the scene. So it was pretty. We just created the opportunity to have luck, which was we saw a lot of people.
And I think, the physical relationship they have is a huge part of the book. It becomes obviously a huge component of the movie. And it's just, I think like a lot of the sex scenes are depicted in a way, like especially the Paris scene, in this very vulnerable, honest way that you don't really see a lot on screen, frankly. So how did you handle those kind of super intimate moments?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that because of the way the book was written, I was being given the challenge by Casey McQuiston, the book's author, to make something that was also incredibly sexy and that in which the sex was part of the plot development, that actually we used that scene in Paris to really truly sort of blossom their romance and bring them very close together physically and emotionally. We talked a lot about the journey that these two characters take with each other sexually and how each encounter throughout the film sort of brings them even more, makes them even more vulnerable with each other, and just sort of creates that attachment that you need in these two characters. And like I was blessed with two actors who were really, really respectful of the process and really cared very much about their characters. I had an amazing intimacy coordinator, and the four of us, we talked a lot about what that scene in Paris needed to be for the story and how we could best pull that off in a way that was both appropriate to the story, getting what we needed for story, and then also making sure that these were things that these two actors felt comfortable doing. I think part of the vulnerability in that is that the two of them really relied on each other so much throughout the making of the film, and in that scene, shooting that scene that day, they really, really needed each other. And so what you see on screen as sort of these two characters falling in love and really having this connection, I think a large part of that was due to the fact that on set, these two actors were doing something that was very, can be potentially uncomfortable and can certainly be very vulnerable making. And they knew that they needed each other. And so the eyeball to eyeball connection between them in that scene was real.
Yeah, I think it takes it to something where, um, you think of this story and it's a steamy romantic comedy, but it takes it to a very deeper emotional level as well. Is that a difficult like tonal shift for you in the making of this?
Yeah, we talked a lot about the tone of it. Throughout much of the film, I really wanted the tone of it to feel like a 1930s screwball comedy. I was looking at a lot of Howard Hawks. I was looking at a lot of Preston Sturges, and I was encouraging the actors to watch those movies and to sort of to come to set prepared to do something in that style. However, I think one of the things that was so true about the book and so successful about the book is that Casey never really flinched at allowing you to feel things. And the movie is a comedy for sure, but I think that we all sort of understood that it also needed to operate as a drama. And it was primarily a comedy that stopped being a comedy every now and again in order to deliver the drama. So that tonal shift that we tried to pull off in the Paris scene, it was one of the few sort of through the looking glass moments that we had in the film, that we were telling the audience that still going to be a comedy, still going to have a lot of fun at this movie, but these feel like high stakes
Mhm.
endeavors. And so, yeah, tone for us was such a big thing, and we spent a lot of time discussing it and then really keeping honest with ourselves on set.
One of my other favorite moments is courtesy of President Uma Thurman, which is great casting as a president, because she has this heart-to-heart with her son, which is kind of like what I feel like most gay people would dream of when they think of an accepting parental moment like that. Can you talk about crafting that moment with her?
Yeah, actually, Casey and I were talking about that scene recently, because in the book, it's really played for laughs. The book is very, very comedy forward, and again, I knew that when I was working on the script, I needed to sort of soften the comedy there, and I needed to deliver a really human moment between these two characters. Like in the book, she's like, all right, come back. And she's like in a couple of hours and she's made a PowerPoint presentation and she's like, explain this to him. And I was like, that's not going to really work in the film. We need to A, just keep moving, but B, tonally, we need to see this mother actually see that her son is desperately in need of some care and some attention and some love. So when I was writing the scene, then especially when I got on set with Uma and Taylor, I basically was like, look, this is an opportunity to sort of like be the greatest mom ever. And Uma has 3 kids, so she's done, she's had a lot of parental experience, far more than I have. But I think what she saw in the scene and what we really had a lot of success pulling out of her in it is a woman who never expected to have this conversation with her son, but who as virtue of being like a really kick-ass president, knows exactly what to say in this moment. She's probably far more educated on sort of gay sexual health than even her son is, and as this progressive, Democratic president. And I think, watching the scene, a lot of people tell me that it's sort of like, not only is she sort of like the mom that everybody wishes that they had, but like she's the president that everybody wishes that we had. We had a lot of fun doing that scene, and a lot of it, I think, for me and for those of us working on the film, is a lot of wish fulfillment in that scene. Boy, wouldn't it be great if that's how that played out in homes across the world, and certainly wouldn't it be great if every U.S. president knew off the top of their heads what that got to get their son on Truvada. It's yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was one of my favorite days of shooting, and especially with Uma.
This is your directorial debut. You have plenty of credits as a writer, but what was there like a skill set from writing that you thought directly applied here that really helped you?
No.
All new.
Not of it. It's a totally different skill set. I think that I was blessed to have Stephen Daldry as a kind of directing mentor, unofficial directing mentor for me when we did The Inheritance together, which was basically me spending 3 years watching Stephen direct and understanding what a good director looks like. So I do think that the overlap between observing Stephen direct a play of mine and then taking those skills onto set, very much, that was always in my mind. It was always, what would Stephen do? I was also reading the Mark Harris's Mike Nichols biography while we were making the movie. So I had these like Stephen Daldry, Mike Nichols in my head as I was making it. But yeah, no, I wish I could say that it was just the easiest transition, but it's an entirely different skill set. I think the thing that is undeniable is that storytelling is storytelling is storytelling. Story is the same. It works in a different tempo on film, for sure. But the things that I learned as a storyteller on the stage absolutely applied to my work as a director. Everything else, it was totally new to me, and I learned on the job.
Well, it was a great time to learn on the job, and the end result was wonderful. So thank you, Matthew, so much for sitting with me. Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby. Here with me is Sterlin Harjo from Reservation Dogs. And I think your series finale, Dig, serves it's a great send-off for this series. And I think comedy series can be hard to end on a satisfying note. Was that weighing on you? Did you approach this episode any differently?
No, I was pretty excited about it. I always kind of knew that that episode was going to be something that we ended on. And there's I mean, I think that like the show kind of masks itself as like a story about four kids, but as the series goes along, it ends up being about a whole community. And one of the things that in my community that I'm reflecting, one of the sort of more memorable events or cultural things that happen is a funeral. And they're not just sad, they're also funny, and everyone's coming together and everyone's there for each other. And then there's protocol, and there's certain things that we do, like dig the grave, and fast and things like that. And it's sort of the culmination of like everything that I wanted to express in the show. So I always had my eye sort of set on ending the series at a funeral. And throughout my career, I'd always wanted to make a movie or have a feature set in that setting. So I was kind of ready for that, you know. And it's a good way to get everyone in the show together. You know, it's like, you know, I didn't have the problem of like having to make it feel too episodic by leaving each character and going to the other character. I literally had them interacting and sort of you know, literally walking through each other's path and the shots and in the episode. So it served a lot of purposes.
Hmm. You mentioned community, and I love Lily Gladstone's really beautiful description of it at the beginning of this episode, which she uses snack foods to describe it. What is that like, kind of towing the line between comedy and this really genuine, heartfelt moment?
I don't know. I mean, I've been asked that a lot since making the show, and I don't. All I can say is that that is my tone. You know, I have no trouble hitting that tone. I have no trouble balancing that tone. It is innately in me to, you know, whenever it feels like it needs to be funny, and not be afraid to go and to be a bit more dramatic or serious. And I think a lot of people, whether they're, I don't know, I grew up, and I think the way that I grew up, the humor and tragedy in Native communities is always right next to each other. And I think it's because it was about survival. So for me, I've never had trouble with that. I think that people that consider themselves more comedy writer or more of a dramatic writer, I think there's a lot of fear in doing both. And I see people kind of afraid, you know, if they're comedy writers, they're afraid to really step out and, you know, be dramatic. It might feel cheesy or something, but I've never, you know, had a problem with being cheesy. I can dip into both sides of my brain, I think. So
Yeah, well, there's certainly, like, you know, what some people would probably say gallows humor in this episode, which I think helps that tone of like comedic and also mournful that
right.
this episode lives in.
Yeah, I think that in general, whenever I'm writing, and when I was writing the finale um with Chad Charlie, I really thought about every time I'm writing something, I really just, does it feel real? You know, does it feel truthful? And I really hold myself to the flame as far as writing goes, uh, with that notion of like, does this feel real or not? And you can create your own rules, you know, like it doesn't have to be a super hyper realistic movie or a show. It can be heightened, you know, it can be absurd. But you set the rules for your show. Does it feel authentic to your show? Does it feel authentic to your characters? Does it feel truthful to the world that you have created? And I really, you know, try to establish that and get a feeling for that early on, and then I just abide by that. And I think with, you know, with the finale, that's one of the things that I tried to balance is, you know, I don't want it to, I'm not trying to make people cry for crying's sake. You know, I'm trying to tell the story about these characters, and they're saying goodbye to each other, and maybe not forever, but for the moment, they're saying goodbye to each other. And people love those characters, and I wanted people to feel that loss and also the hope that they all felt for each other as they journey on into whatever they're doing in the universe. So
Yeah, I really appreciated that. It kind of says, because it is the community at the heart of this, that the community is permanent in them, no matter if they're staying or if they're going off somewhere. Why was that important for you to incorporate?
I think that look, I mean, not to get super heavy, but and you know, Lily says this in the episode, um, when the European slash American federal government came after us over the many, many years that they came after us, that's what they attacked was community, because they knew that that's what we held most important. That's how our societies function. That's how our religions function. That's how our ceremonies function. That's how our art functions. That's how everything functions in our as a community within our communities. And so the best way to get rid of us is to, you know, I mean, part of community, right, is like sharing and what's mine is yours. Um, and you know, there's even points in history where Native people were given blankets that were infected with smallpox to eradicate them. So, I mean, in every example of our interaction with the U.S. government, it has been about breaking our community, which means breaking the individual, which means breaking a whole people. And so, you know, to me, that is the most important thing, and it's what for me getting that right and making people that aren't from my community feel it. It's not good enough just that I feel it, but I want people that didn't grow up in my community to feel that communal aspect of our communities, you know. So
Yes, I think it rings through pretty clearly. And I towards excuse me, towards the end of the episode, Bear is reminded that the word goodbye is a colonial concept, and he doesn't have an actual word for it. And I'm curious, now that the show has ended and you can kind of look back on it, does that concept kind of resonate with you with your experience of concluding the show? How are you feeling afterwards?
yeah, I mean, I think that the show kind of continues in the individuals that love that show, you know. It doesn't go away. It's like, you know, people relive it and people have made up their own minds of where it goes. And who knows, maybe I'll revisit some of those characters. Maybe I'll revisit that world again. We have a word that's haram chihichatlis in my language, and that's until we see each other again. You know, it's like never goodbye, but we'll see each other again. And so that's how I feel. That's how I feel about those characters in that show. It was very hard to see them go, but it needed to happen.
Yeah. Well, I think I heard that when you set out to write and create this season, that you didn't know it was going to end. And so what was the impetus? When did you know, okay, this is how we're
We
going to
started
go?
writing. Well, originally I was going to try and do an episode that took place in the 70s. That didn't work out. And so I just took that down to one episode. And I just felt like, you know, kind of like how I said, I hold myself to make sure that it's authentic to these characters and the world that I've created. The ending also needed to feel that way, and I didn't want it to drag out too long, because to me, like, this is one of the first of its kind, this show, like as far as like Native experiences go. I mean, people are so proud of it. Everywhere I go, Native people are talking to me about this show, and non-natives, but like specifically Native people are like, you know, thank you for doing what you did. I needed to end that show at the height of its love and popularity. For me, it was too perfect to have a critic or even a viewer at some point to say, yeah, this drug on too long. It needed to end like a season ago. Like, I couldn't let that happen. And no matter what, for me, it's a perfect show, and it will always be there for people to visit. And it wasn't just about entertaining people. Like, you know, we took hundreds and hundreds of years of misrepresentation and we turned it on its head. And people felt that, and they were very proud of it. And, you know, my dad said something to me when the first season rolled out. He said, you know, you've given Native people a reason to hold their head up really high right now. And like, that was one of the biggest compliments to me, because I'm not doing this for entertainment purposes. I like entertaining people. I like people to watch what I do, but you know, it's bigger than that. And I think that it should be bigger than that.
Well, it's a really beautiful ending, so congratulations on a very great run, Sterling. Thank you so much for joining me. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann with Gold Derby, and I'm here with an incredible group of directors. Joining me today is Robert King for Elsbeth, Boots Riley for I'm a Virgo, Michael Dinner for Justified, City Primeval, Matthew López from Red, White, and Royal Blue, and Sterlin Harjo for Reservation Dogs. And your styles are, I think, are all so different. So I kind of want to dive into process a little bit. There's obviously many moving parts to a shoot and much work that has to occur before you even get on set. For each of you, what's the most important part of your preparation that when you do it, you say, okay, now I'm ready to take this on? I think Boots, we'll go with you first. I know you got something.
Finish the script. I'm luckily so far only doing stuff that, creating. And so, yeah, it's as I'm going, I'm kind of getting prepared for it. I mean, with this thing, obviously there were other things. We had to figure out how to do stuff. So I originally with this, I went, I live in the Bay Area, so we've got a lot of the old school folks that did like the original Star Wars and stuff. So I went to Phil Tippett and Dennis Muren and got them to like basically, co-sign and say, yeah, this can be done. And matter of fact, you can do it for cheaper than you normally would if you use, these techniques and you prepare. So it was a constant, a constant development of, but I guess the thing is, I know I'm never prepared. So I don't wait for this magic time of feeling like, okay, now I got it. I'm just always moving and getting more prepared and feeling scared and using that worry to dot my I's and cross my T's.
Do you use storyboard?
For this, we definitely had to storyboard.
So you storyboarded the visual effects, anything else?
Well, we storyboarded the whole show because we had to know, I had to prove, okay, that we could get this done in this many days. Like, here's all the shots that don't have any of these effects in it. And then we're only doing 2 shots on this scene, so we can get that done real quick. So a lot of it is me like convincing people that it can be done. So I have to storyboard, I have to use little dolls and take pictures and all that sort of stuff.
Who else feels worried and unprepared while you're making
Well,
one of your shows?
if you're not worried, then you've lost your edge. I mean, for me at least, that 25% of prepping to shoot is getting on the inside of the material. If you've written it, then you're already on the inside. But if you're a director on City Primeval, I wrote a good chunk of it. But if it's something that I haven't written, I like to say that directors have to think that they wrote it by the time they're done. I've worked with one writer. We've done 3 projects together, and at the end of working together, a friend of ours said, well, how was it? I said, same as usual. When we're done, he thinks he directed it. I think I wrote it. It's a great marriage. But for me, at least, like I said, 25% is really about the preparation, is getting on the inside. And then I'll make 3 passes at a script, which is really about the visual language. And once I've made the first pass, I'm able to say, here's what the story is in visual terms from the beginning to the end. And then once I've done that, I have the ability then to walk on the stage or the location and tear it all up. And somehow we approach that, but it's kind of I think the safety net.
For me as a first-time filmmaker, I there was never a moment where I felt entirely prepared, because every day I had never encountered anything before. And so for me, I was lucky enough to have written the script, so I knew that pretty well. But everything else was a mystery to me. And for me, the pre-production process was learning how to make a movie. I had a great first AD. I had a fantastic cinematographer, Stephen Goldblatt, who had started making movies in the 1960s. So the thing that Stephen said to me the week approaching it, which sort of really calmed me, was like, you're not an inexperienced filmmaker, you're an unpracticed filmmaker. And by the end of the first week, you won't even be an unpracticed filmmaker anymore. And that actually was incredibly helpful to me. So, but just looking at how the movie was made, for me, that was the big thing.
And that's the
Yeah,
cool
for
thing
me,
about directing. If you don't, you should learn every time you go out. If you don't feel like you're going to throw up the first day of shooting, every time you go out, something's the matter. So it's an ongoing process, and it's an educational process.
and for me, I've never thought that you should feel like everything's gonna go well. I don't know. I just never did. From doing performances, I've been on big concerts and fallen over flat on my back and got up and was mortified and kept doing the show. And afterward, people said, "Oh, you guys killed it." So I know, like, I've only been able to calm myself by being like, whatever happens in an hour, the show is going to be over. Right. And that's that. Time keeps moving on. You just keep producing, and what happens is what happened. Right. And so I prepare as much as I can, and I'm fine with that. But my caring about it is knowing that I'm preparing.
Yeah, I feel like I have a panic attack usually like 2 nights before I shoot, and then I'm fine, and then I get on set, and as soon as you get there, you're like, oh, I can do it. Um, and then, and also I usually write a lot of the stuff that I do. So I know it so well that there's a different process for me if I'm directing something and I didn't write it, because I've been learning I've been prepping it since I started writing it, like Boots was saying, but like, and so that translates right into being a director on it. And I tend to like, try to prep as much as possible, but also leave enough room for me to surprise myself and find things while I'm directing. I think that's a big key to it, especially how fast we move in television. Like, if I'm too rigid, I can kind of get caught up doing that and not allowing things to organically change and feel right.
Yeah.
I think, your shows, all of them feature exceptional performances from the actors of all different acting styles. And I'm curious what happens when you have a performer there and you can tell like there's like one more magic something that they need to really nail the scene. How do you go about talking to an actor to really get that performance out of them that you're looking for?
I'd say you'd have to know what that something is, right?
Hmm.
And, because you can't very well go just say, I mean, I guess you could and just be like, hey, you need something more. But I think it's more about being in touch with the character and what's real. For me, I don't know. I'm sure there's all sorts of ways to do it.
I think for me, it's just my only direction is usually do 10% less or 10% more. Because usually they're in the right direction. You just need to bracket in on how broad or how real you want something to be.
I think that the trick is you have to figure out what the needs are of the actor. I mean, actors need different things. Sometimes they need a friend, they need a mommy, a daddy, a teacher, a disciplinarian, a collaborator, and you got to figure out what, or just someone who's the audience, who's able to react in a visceral way to the performance, and you need to figure out what are the needs of how can they feel safe, how can you get the best from them, and once you figure that out, it's gold.
I made a decision never to lie to my actors. I was always just incredibly honest with them about everything. And where that ended up helping me was not necessarily when I told them that they needed something else or that thing, something was missing. It was a really great tool when I told them it was great and they believed me. I was like, no, we don't need to do another one. We can move on. I have what I need. Being honest with them ended up being a time saver when things were going well.
Yeah, I'll usually try to figure out for me, like what it is that rings untrue about it, and then connect that to, like let's say an actor is doing, taking extra pauses because it feels grander. and I'll talk about what the real situation is that's happening outside that door or the next thing that they're trying to get to, instead of just saying speed that shit up, right?
Yeah.
I'll be, I want them to come to it because I don't want them to just speed it up. I don't want them to just talk fast where the character wouldn't. I'm trying to get in contact with why I think it needs to go faster to be more real, you know.
Yeah, you got to give them space to do their thing. I mean, I worked with a young actress one time who gave this amazing performance, and someone came up to me and said, "How did you get that performance from her? I mean, what did you do to get that performance?" I said, "You really want to know what I did? I got out of the way." And sometimes you have to learn how to get out of the way.
Yeah, I mean, directors are pretty full of themselves, but in fact, a lot of this is actors, and writing. I mean, we're probably more impressive for whatever we've written. The directing, I don't know. I
You
don't know.
cast the
Even
right
talk,
people
even
and then
answering
you
these
just let 'em
questions
go.
feels like we're inflating ourselves. It's you're working at the head of a massive collaboration. Um, I don't know. It's hard to talk about it, isn't it? Because I don't think we're not responsible for a lot of this.
But I think our job too is to react to what's happening. So just like actors, like we have to react to the atmosphere of the room, to what the crew had that day to eat. Was it awful? Like, was it good? Like, is it hot that day? What, like we're kind of like there to manage that and know what each actor needs separately from the other actors too, and I think that for me, that's kind of how I look at it. And yeah, it's like everything kind of goes out the window. Like the writing is the thing that I really just, pour myself over and, get depressed about and whatever. Once I'm on set, it's like, oh, it's kind of reacting and like reacting to the environment that you're in.
Hmm.
I learned that I'm the first viewer. I'm the first watcher of the film. I'm in my monitor and I'm watching their performance as it happens. And my job, I'm editing their performance on set in so many ways. And my job is to tell them what I'm seeing and hope that they believe what I'm saying to them.
Are there certain directors that you all really admire and maybe try to emulate or at least get inspiration from in your career? Who are those people for you?
For me, Jonathan Demme, and I mean everybody's probably Kubrick, but Jonathan Demme is very good.
Emir Kusturica,
Oh
Michelle
man.
Gondry, um, Gaspar Noé, stuff that makes you repulse a little bit, and then gives me the obstacle of trying to pull people back in. As I want people to feel something, and if it makes them hate my thing, cool. Hopefully, at least the same number of people will love it.
I really admire directors when I watch their work, and it really feels like they have this point of view. I remember years ago, I watched two movies back to back in a couple nights when they came out. One was Heat, and the other was Babe. And someone said, "What are your favorite movies of the year?" And I said, "Well, two movies they're similar to me." And they said, "What?" I said, "Well, Heat and Babe." And they said, "Well, what are you talking about? Why are they similar?" And I said, "Well, because both directors kind of were unflinching in their point of view." I said, he from the beginning to the end, and Babe, the pig turns to the camera 10 seconds in the movie and says, "I miss my mom." I felt like in both cases there were directors who just said, "This is the story I'm going to tell, and I'm not going to vary from that."
I tend to like make playlists of music with each project that I'm doing. And then I kind of treat films that way. So each project that I'm on, I'll kind of curate what I'm watching. And sometimes it's like less blank documentaries. A recent pilot that I just shot was Kusturita's Underground.
Oh,
And or then I'll go to like The Long Goodbye or like whatever's kind of like in the same place that I'm trying to speak from, I'll watch these documentaries. There's a documentary that Les Blake made called a Poem as a Naked Person about Leon Russell that came out a long time after it was made. And that was something that I watched recently for this project that I'm doing. So I kind of curate a different like playlist for myself on films. And Tony Scott's like True Romance or something, like it depends on what I'm making and like how, if it's an ensemble or if it's very specific. But that's kind of one of the fun parts, is just to kind of keep stuff playing as I'm cooking everything.
Did you say
Yeah.
that you're doing a pilot version of a series of Underground?
No. I said I was watching Underground for a recent.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
For me, it was the screwball comedies of the 30s and 40s. I watched Preston Sturges films. I watched Howard Hawks. I probably watched Bringing Up Baby like half a dozen times. And really, for me, what it was just is like getting to understand how comedy works on screen with actors that I know are really adept performers, and just learning how they would just shoot these scenes in one and get their actors in a frame as much as possible together. And just what was said earlier is like, get out of the way early on and just sort of like figure out how much of this scene you can get in one. That way, watching all those directors just let their actors breathe and react, and not edit so much of their performance. That for me was the big lesson that I took watching early stuff.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for being here with me today and for having such a great conversation. And really, congratulations on all of your excellent work this season.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Yes.